but I didn't want that. I still didn't want that to be at that level, but he kind of just pushed, he pushed the issue. He got out of the car and he came running back around the back of the car towards me. And at that point, I tried to yell at him, stop. I pulled out my gun. I didn't flash the gun prior to or anything like that. Pulled out my gun and I shot him. And he turned around and he ran back around his car. As I was shooting, he started to turn. I kind of started to turn to head more in the southeast direction. After he got around his car, I was out in the middle of the street and I realized that I didn't know where I was going. I had nothing in that direction. So I turned around and ran back westward toward my mother's house. And I passed Mr. Maestas as he was up in the driveway of the houses there on the corner. And that is when he did at that time have his hands up, but I continued running past him. There's no shots fired or anything like that. The shooting all occurred initially right when he came around the car. All of that took place at the back of the vehicle. So that's the part where the trial transcripts will show that the witnesses that seen it testified to that the shots were taken back there. I did not shoot Mr. Maestas with his hands up or when he was in the driveway. It was during the initial confrontation from after he exited the car.
We are about to watch the parole hearing of a Utah man who was sentenced in 2004 for murder. Now, he claims, hey, look, I did not execute the man while he was on the floor with his hands in the air, and we will review the court documents to see whether that was true or not. But 100-year sentence, 20 years into that sentence, and he has a chance at parole. There's something also interesting about this case, which Sir Richard found, and that is his brother made the headlines for quite some time in Utah when he was granted early parole, compassionate release parole, and then immediately went and killed his girlfriend. That made the news. We'll talk about that in the unpacking.
Okay. We are on the record. This is the date and time set for an original hearing for Isiah Voss. Offender number 167947, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
My name is Scott Stevenson. I'm the chair of the Board of Pardons and Parole, and I'll be conducting this hearing. I'm going to be taking testimony from you, so if you'll raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to provide is going to be truthful and accurate?
Yes, sir.
Lower your hand. Thank you. Did you receive at least 7 days' notice of this hearing?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And how did you receive that notice?
Through my blue packet.
Okay.
that
So,
would be
a
held
letter?
today. Specifically, yes.
Did you get a chance to review the disclosure packet?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any concerns? Were there any discrepancies in that packet?
Yeah, I do have a few concerns in there. I would, I don't want to, focus on those, but there are a few things that I would like to clear up in there because I think it's extremely pertinent.
Okay.
And so, if you don't mind, I wrote them down so I could just read off it to keep track of what they are, because there's a few different ones, but
Go ahead.
okay, thank you.
And if you could tell me like the area and then the discrepancy.
Yeah, the biggest one is with the PSI report that was done after my sentencing, or prior to my sentencing, but after my conviction back in 2005. And that's regarding the synopsis of what actually occurred at the incident of the homicide.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure why, but the information in there says that I shot Mr. Maestas while he had his hands up,
Mhm.
and that's just not true. And so I actually had copies made of my trial transcripts, and these are of state witnesses and also one defense witness that was called. They were witnesses to the shooting, and there's no testimony of that in there because it's just not true. So I would just ask that the board, at maybe when you go back, if you could take these and look at that part, because I don't want that in there. It seems to be quite aggravating as far as the situation in and of itself. I mean, it's bad enough that somebody lost their life. I don't want the presumption of that it was done in a more of an egregious fashion than it actually happened.
Okay. We'll have the packet be traded to the officers and they can
Okay.
look through the packet to make sure nothing's in it,
Okay.
just to be safe. Okay.
And then, there is, I would just like to ask a little bit, if you could today, if you could clarify for me how my, projected release date, which originally in my PSI at two different places in there, right at the end where the matrix guideline is at.
Mm-hmm.
My matrix guideline on one says 18 years plus 1 year for the gun enhancement, so that my projected release would be a 19-year time served. Then on the next page, it says 20 years. And we are at 20 years this month. So from October of 2004 is when my case occurred. And so I was just wondering how it bumped up to now in my newer one that the projected release is November of 2026, even though I have picked up 2 new charges while in prison.
Mm-hmm.
They're both weapons charges. One's a 0 to 5 and one is 1 to 15. The 0 to 5 will actually expirate within 2 months. December, it's expirated. The 1 to 15, I was sentenced on it back in March of this year. However, the case originated in December of 2021. So I don't think that I think there might be a miscalculation in credit for time served, or I'm not quite sure, but the matrix, to my understanding from my attorney, was 30 months on the felony 2.
Mm-hmm.
And with the credit for time served, it's 2021 was obviously longer than 30 months ago, or maybe I think it was 27 months ago. So within the next couple months, that would be the complete matrix, even without the, my understanding for what is a 10% of that is what is supposed to be served. So 3 months.
Okay.
You know, so I'm just concerned about that being pushed out to 2026. And then,
Well, before we move on,
Okay.
I'll get with time accounting to verify that date and maybe the reasoning or the
okay.
equation that created that date.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then I was just concerned with when I got my blue packet, I noticed that some of the pages that I submitted for things to be copied and added into there didn't quite print clearly. So I'm just wondering if you guys on your, maybe if you have the electronic file of that, if it'll be clear to where you can actually read my responses to like the questionnaire packet that I filled out that my caseworker gave to me. And also there's some of the pages were skipped, like they're actually not in there. So it like goes from page 2 to page 4. So page 3 was missing, or
Oh, the questionnaire packet.
yeah, and et cetera. And also with some of the certificates that I provided my caseworker to copy. One being, let me see, one would be well, I have 2 notices from Miss Evans, who was in charge of it used to be RSAT, I think it's now called IOP, the inpatient or intensive
Intensive
outpatient.
outpatient. Mhm.
Yeah, I did attempt to sign up for that, even though I don't have a drug history. I don't, but because I was in population and that was one of the courses that was offered when I was in Okra 1. She said I didn't fit the criteria for it at that time. So I just asked her if she would write me a notice explaining that I did attempt to get in there just to show that I was taking some initiative to do some programming.
Mhm.
And she did that, but I know those are not copied in to the blue packet, but I have the original copies here today. If I could give those also with the transcripts to
Yep.
the officer. So,
Give them to the officers and they'll look at it and then they'll give it to us. Cool.
okay. And then there's just a few things in the blue packet, mostly that also come from the original PSI that I would like to kind of clear up. They're about my juvenile history,
Mhm.
but some of them are incorrect. Like in my PSI, it says I don't have any felony convictions as a juvenile, and I do not. But then in my blue packet, for whatever reason, it says I do have felony convictions as a juvenile. I mean, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm not quite sure how much weight the juvenile stuff has at this point, but it's still an inaccuracy that I thought I would like to point out.
And we want to be accurate, so I appreciate you bringing that to
And-
our attention.
And then also, I've never been placed into any mental health institution. At some point in the blue packet, it states that just on the points for like the matrix or something of that fashion, it was stating that one of my placements was in a mental health institution, and that's not correct either.
So mental health level is not C,
I'm sorry, what?
your mental health level? I show it's
it's-
C.
Okay, yeah, I don't know how their grading system is, but yeah, I've never been placed into like juvenile or adult. I've done mental health therapy on my own accord while being incarcerated here, but I've never been in any type of institution that is specific to that, like whether it's in the adult system. I've never been housed in Current, or at Draper, it would have been Olympus.
Mhm.
And I've never, and then in the juvenile system, I don't even know what their mental health institutions are, but I've never been in one.
Okay.
So.
And we'll go over your mental health later on in this
Okay.
hearing, okay?
And then there's just another one in the PSI that states that I was pulled over at some point in time in a vehicle and a weapon was taken off of me. And I addressed that at sentencing, that's not true. I don't know if there is even a police report about that, but that's just a mistake that was in there. I don't have any charges that are even closely related to being pulled out of a vehicle with a weapon on me, especially in the year of 2004. So,
Okay.
okay, and that's all I would like to address as far as what I seen as concerns in.
Okay. Let me make sure we're on the same page. So in the original or the second PSI
Mhm.
in 2005, there are some facts that you're disputing because it didn't happen and it was not reflected in the court testimony at all.
Yes, sir.
So you're going to provide us a copy of that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The release date started out at 18 years plus 1, which was 19. You're disputing the change to 2026.
Yes,
You're
sir.
saying that you've met the 18 years right now,
Yes, sir.
plus the 1.
Yes, sir.
And your question is the two charges that you've obtained in prison, one's going to expire, and the other one is going to be done within the next 2 months?
Well, the matrix on it will be, it doesn't actually expire. It's a 1 to 15, so it doesn't expire until 20, or I'm not sure, whatever it would be from 2021 to 2036, I
Mhm.
believe is its expiration year. But the matrix on it is supposed to be with it being a 30-year or a 30-month, matrix. And then at 10% of that would only be 3 months, so 90 days. And the charge is actually from December of 2021.
So I show this is case number 221-901-514, possession of a dangerous weapon by a restricted person, felony 2. Sentence date was 3/8/24, 1 to 15. It expires 3/8 of 39.
Okay, yeah, and I'm there, and I'm not, there's 3 years added there just because that's from the sentencing instead of from the time the charge was actually filed.
Yeah.
Or the incident was actually committed. Instead, there's basically a 3-year gap.
Yeah, that's a good question.
But I've been incarcerated, the whole time. It's not,
Right.
I didn't break incarceration on that, so.
Okay. That may be the charge that pushed it up to 2026, but I'll double check.
Okay, I appreciate
And then
that.
through your caseworker, we'll communicate with you.
Okay, thank you.
And then the questionnaire packet, there are pages that are missing. You're going to provide us those pages? Right.
Yeah, I do have, well, I don't have it from the questionnaire packs because I didn't get a copy back of
Okay.
that. The copy I do have back is the missing stuff, which is in my blue packet. But I have some of the other things that didn't print. Just mainly those notices from Miss Evans, the programming director, about that I tried to sign up for a program just to show that I were taking initiative to do programming when I was offered.
And we'll go over
opportunity.
your programming in this hearing as well.
Okay.
And then the other PSI, juvenile history, there's no mental health institution stays.
No, sir.
And then you're disputing a traffic stop where a weapon was taken. in 2004. You're saying it's not factual.
Yeah, it's not factual. And that's the only one that I was able to address at sentencing because I was given my precinct report about 5 minutes before I walked in the courtroom. So I kind of had to really rush to go through it. And that was the first thing I noticed in there that was incorrect. So I did address that at sentencing. My attorney brought that up on the record, but
Okay. Okay. All right, you ready to proceed?
yes, sir.
Okay. Do we have anybody attending online? Any victim representatives? I note family and supporters. Okay. All right. We don't need to go into the exact details of the incident, but we're going to start with that presenting case. My first question is, how did you know the victim?
We're from the same area in Salt Lake City. We both grew up in Rose Park. So
Okay.
that's how initially like we know of each other. And then back at that time, we just happened to be associated with different gangs, both from the Rose Park area. So I never had any prior to the incidents that led up to the shooting. I never had any real interaction with him. There was none negative specifically. I seen him around a few times, but never really interacted at all.
Okay.
Before the summer of 2004, when there was a series of incidents that I'm not sure how they started. I didn't find out until I actually received my discovery that I believe Mr. Maestas had some issues with some guys, some black guys that were allegedly from my gang from BMG. And for whatever reason, because of my association, that brought me into the mix, even though I didn't have any direct link with the issues or the fights he was having, or there was apparently a shooting between them. But it started during that summer. Then the windows in my mom's cars were broke out at my mother's house out of the vehicles. And that was kind of the first incident. It had passed. There was some discussion between mutual friends about the issues going on, then trying to get them settled. It escalated to a total of 3 shootings at my mother's house. 2 of which were on back-to-back nights. One, there is a police report about because the police were notified and they came out and they found 15 shells out by the mailbox in the street from around the area where the shooter was. About 10 of those rounds went through my mother's room, her window and her walls. At the time, I wasn't sure who did it. I did find out later that through mutual friends that Mr. Maestas was bragging that he was the one who did it. So some mutual friends again reached out. They put us in contact to try to get it settled as far as to stop the shooting stuff from occurring. And because I believe there were some shootings either at his residence or maybe at his mom and dad's residence. I'm not quite sure. They were actually neighbors, like they lived a house apart. So I want to know exactly which houses were shot up or at what times, because I wasn't involved directly in those. Excuse me, let me back up just a little bit.
Mhm.
After the shootings, after the first shooting in my mom's house, the first 2 that were on back-to-back nights, before I got in contact with him directly, I did run into him. Well, he was driving down Starcrest Drive, which my mother lives on, and I was outside with one of my friends, Adrian Lewis, and Mr. Myers just pulled up in front of the house. He was with a couple friends of his. They were in his car. He asked me to approach the car. When I approached the car, I noticed he had a firearm on his lap, which was I recognized as a Tech 9. And he was questioning me about if I was involved in the shootings at either his residence or like I said, his parents' residence. I'm not sure which one, but he was inquiring about that. I told him I didn't have anything to do with it. And, you know, some words were exchanged, threat made back towards me about that. If he felt otherwise or found out otherwise, he'd be back. And then that was the end of that specific incident. It was a few weeks maybe later passed by, and a mutual friend put me in contact with him on the phone because I believe there had been another shooting at either his residence or his mother and them's residence. And it was basically to try to squash the whole issue. We were trying to work it out to agree to a fist fight. I had recently had a metal plate put in my hand. My hand had been broken. And I told him I agreed that I would fight him when my hand was healed up and such. And then when I did inquire to if he was the one responsible for shooting my mom's house up, he admitted it was him. The conversation ended up becoming heated. I was cussing at him. He was cussing at me. He said, well, this is when he made direct threats towards me, my mother, and my younger brother, that he would shoot us when he seen us. He would shoot my mom in the face and these kind of things. And I was upset. I was, using coarse language, and then I hung the phone up through the phone. It was on speakerphone. I had numerous people over at my house that also heard the conversation. They did testify to this during my trial. But so the conversation was left it went from we were supposed to be settling it with a fist fight, a mutual combat, to then threats were made on my life. So I went out and picked up a gun. I purchased a gun from the streets. This conversation maybe occurred 2 to 3 weeks at the most prior to the day, the October 21st, 2004, when I was standing at the bus stop on the corner of Starcrest and 700 North, which is a half a block down the street from my mom's house. We live directly on Starcrest, just up the street on 8th North. And I looked up and I seen that Mr. Maestas was coming down the street. He was headed eastbound. I was on the north side of the street. He was on the phone, and I was hoping that he didn't see me. I'm kind of out here in the open. There's nowhere to go. There's like some apartments right there that are further off from the street. So there was nowhere to go. And there's a house right there on the corner with the fence around it. Mr. Maestas did see me. He responded to whoever he was talking to on the phone with something excited. Got over into the middle lane. He made a U-turn and came back towards me. I, at this time, was kind of walking westward back towards Starcrest a little bit further. And he pulled up. And as he pulled up, the first thing I did as I was looking for was to see if he had a weapon, because he threatened my life and he threatened my family's lives. And there's already been these shootings occurring, and I felt like those threats were legitimate. And I noticed I could see both of his hands at that time. I didn't necessarily feel that he could do anything potentially at that time. Try to tell him, keep driving. He was irate and screamed, "Yeah, you're that motherfucker, and I got you now." At this point, I had stopped, and kind of as he was doing this, I started to walk back east now towards the rear of his car. But I'm watching him, and he throws the car in park, and while he's talking, being irate and stuff, I can't see what he does necessarily, but I see him make a motion as to like he's reaching down to grab something either off the floor or from under the seat. My presumption is that that's a firearm, because he's made these threats about shooting me, about killing me. My mother's house has been shot up. He's admitted to me and other people that he is responsible for those shootings. I still didn't pull my firearm on him yet. And just for a timeout, that I would like to say that if my intention was that day to just shoot Mr. Maestas, then it would have probably been more reasonable to have shot him right when he pulled up and not let him get out of that car. But I didn't want that I still didn't want that to be at that level, but he kind of just pushed, he pushed the issue. He got out of the car and he came running back around the back of the car towards me. And at that point, I tried to yell at him, stop. I pulled out my gun. I didn't flash the gun prior to or anything like that. Pulled out my gun and I shot him. And he turned around and he ran back around his car. As I was shooting, he started to turn. I kind of started to turn to head more in the southeast direction. After he got around his car, I was out in the middle of the street and I realized that I didn't know where I was going. I had nothing in that direction. So I turned around and ran back westward toward my mother's house. And I passed Mr. Maestas as he was up in the driveway of the house that's there on the corner. And that is when he did at that time have his hands up, but I continued running past him. There's no shots fired or anything like that. The shooting all occurred initially right when he came around the car. All that took place at the back of the vehicle. So that's the part where the trial transcripts will show that the witnesses that seen it testified to that the shots were taken back there. I did not shoot Mr. Maestas with his hands up or when he was in the driveway. It was during the initial confrontation from after he exited the car. I seen somebody I knew happened to be coming through the intersection there. I flagged them down. I jumped in their car. They took me to my mom's house. And I didn't even, at the time, I didn't know that I had even hit Mr. Maestas. But I was worried about the retaliation of that he was going to be coming any minute up to my mom's house, So I asked my mom and my brother to leave. They left. I left the house. Later, I seen it on the news that, in fact, Mr. Maestas had been shot and he actually had passed away. And then the next day, I retained a lawyer, retained counsel, and I turned myself in.
So it's factually accurate, but just the timing of when his hands were up.
Yeah, his hands were up, yes, but there was no shooting done at that time. And I think that is something
But of the way
be
it reads,
considered one way or the other, right? That can be very aggravating or look very aggravating, it's a bad enough situation that, the whole incident that day, the things prior to things that were happening over at his family's residence and my family's residence. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear because I don't want it to look any worse than it already is.
sure. Okay. Explain the circumstances surrounding the homemade weapons
In the prison?
Yeah.
Yeah, I take accountability for the weapons. I've been in prison now, 20 years. I've been attacked a few times actually in prison where I've been stabbed. I think the total number of stab wounds I have is either 13 or 14. Through a couple different incidents. So, basically due to duress, I did have a weapon on. It would be the one that's actually the 0 to 5. And I accept responsibility for that. It was for, self-protection. And I lived in the most violent part of the facility. I lived in the UNAs, which were the maximum security housing units. And so I felt it was necessary to have that at that time. I don't feel those are necessary, now looking back in hindsight is, quite different. But when you're in the midst of that type of environment, in that situation, that's a choice I didn't make. And I take accountability for that. The second one, it was a manufactured and a homemade cutting tool, but it was not a weapon. They did charge me as a weapon. I take responsibility for having it. I don't want to minimize having it, but the intent with it was not a weapon. It was a razor that had a handle attached to it, but it was legitimately used for cutting up cardboard and sizing up paper for sticks and things. I don't know if you're familiar with the art crafts that inmates do. So that's what it was for. But they did charge me with it as a weapon. That's actually why it took almost 3 years for me fighting it. They didn't want to offer me any kind of reasonable deal until I felt that, well, I was just tired of fighting it, and I do accept responsibility for having it. So that's why I pled to the felony too on that one, because it started out as a 5 to life with the habitual violent offender enhancement. So I basically just wanted to get the case settled before coming in today, because I didn't want anything to be holding up the board making a decision on my potential release.
Okay. So I did have a question about the juvenile record. So now the time to clarify. What is your juvenile record?
It's a whole bunch of petty misdemeanor stuff, mostly technical violations for not following with probation. But I started picking up cases when I was pretty young, just stupid things, thefts. Maybe there might be some truancies in there. I'm not sure. It is in the blue packet. I haven't even. I went over it to see, just see if most of the things seemed accurate in there, and they did for the most part. But yeah, off the top of my head, I honestly don't quite remember all of that stuff.
So the only thing you dispute is the mental health aspect.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'll get to the bottom of that when I get
Okay.
back to the office.
Appreciate it.
Okay. So while you have been incarcerated, whether it's jail and prison, you've had 28 disciplinaries. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that sounds probably accurate.
How would you explain that how do you explain that to the board?
Um, I I accept responsibility for those disciplinaries. It's been a long time, and um I made some bad choices while I've been incarcerated. I haven't, been always the best that I can be and that I want to be now. And I accept responsibility for them. I don't want to minimize them. I don't want to try to take away from them. Some of them were more legitimate than others, but at the same time, they are still all on the record, and I accept them for what they are. I've paid my fines that I've received from those, or the lockdown times. I've lost my privileges for those. I've, I've lost time from being able to be in level 3 population. Um, just numerous privileges within the department and stuff. So I'm moving on from those. I've taken them as learning and examples of what not to do.
Mhm.
Definitely. So
Well, just to let you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that we consider when we think about paroling someone. But institutional discipline was one of the big ones because it's an indicative of behavior. Understanding it's a different environment, but also the ability to abide and live within a set of rules, however restrictive they may be. Right?
Mhm.
So just this year alone, you've had 4 disciplinaries. In March of 2024, it was a disorderly conduct, reckless endangerment. Do you remember that incident?
I remember. Yeah, I remember being served a write-up for it. I'm not sure which actual incident it is. Can
It's
you
a
read little bit more
refusal
of
to
the
rack
incident?
in, making aggressive threats towards the officer. Remember that?
I do. I believe that's the incident with Officer Neal.
Okay.
And I was arguing with Officer Neal. However, I was never told to rack in, or because if just in policy and procedure, if we're told to rack in and we don't rack in, then the inmate management systems is activated. IMS would have been activated. They would have brought more staff to rack us in by force,
Mhm.
or to use whatever force they felt necessary to get us to rack in. That wasn't the case. It was over an argument that began with my rec mates, and them feeling disrespected, and then with what Officer Neal went and told the other officers, they shut our phones off. So they were trying to rack our whole rec in. They at a point in time after, but up until that point, I asked Officer Neal was still engaging with the inmates on my rec, and I stepped in and I told him that per policy, he's instigating these inmates and he's not supposed to still be engaging them. If he has an issue, he needs to step away and he needs to activate IMS, and he needs to let other staff come deal with this incident. They need to have a CIT trained CO come down here and speak to these guys. So he said there was, so I asked for the sergeant. He said there was no sergeants on that night. And so I asked him to then contact the shift commander. Lieutenant Millward was actually doing overtime in our housing unit. He was not on as the shift commander that night, but he does feel that duty at times. Mr. Millward, I've known him for quite some time, since he came out of the academy in 2006 or 7, you know. So I was discussing with him about what the problem seemed to be. Lieutenant Millward told us to go ahead and continue with our rec. He would go clarify the issue. If he would go review the cameras, if he felt there was legitimacy to what Officer Neal's side of the story was, then he was going to take our rec. And we said, okay. He did not take our rec. We continued rec that whole night. We racked in later. At that time, my understanding was that me nor any of the other guys on my rec were getting written up for that incident. But a couple days later, we were told that we were. So that's kind of how that developed. And I accept responsibility for not communicating quite properly with Officer Neal. And when I didn't feel like he was doing his job properly, I became, I guess they would say it's more aggressive. I assume they don't like being told what their job actually is to do, or especially when an inmate knows their policy and procedure better than them. So kind of stemmed from that. The write-up occurred. I did get convicted of something. I'm not sure if it was the conviction of the actual write-up, or if it was dropped down by the disciplinary officer. I don't know, but either way, me and Officer Neal later on discussed that. I took it upon myself to request to speak to his direct chain of command, our lieutenants, sergeants, and the captain of our building in Antelope. And they went through and pulled us out because I was trying to find a conflict resolution with the whole incident. They said, well, the write-up was in, so they let that proceed through. But the issue was worked out. I haven't had an issue with Officer Neal since then.
So looking back, and I commend you for trying to find a solution, but at the point of contact, looking back, what could you have done differently?
I could have just stayed out of the incident, because it initially didn't involve me, you know, until our phones were shut off while we were on the phone with our families. We come out limited and max, you know. That's basically the tipping point on what upset me and why I felt I needed to step in and say something. And then it just downrolled from there. But yeah, just at the end of the day, if I would have just stayed out of it, I'm not sure how it might have played out. You know, it's one of those what ifs, but that is ultimately what I could have done. I could have just shut up.
Okay. So the last one, which was the 23rd, it was completed, was a refusal or resist to remove coverings from your window, from your,
Yeah, this is
what was that
new.
about?
This is a new one. I talked to the officer, Contreras. He said the report's not done. It hasn't even been because when the officer writes you up, it then has to go to one of their higher ups, usually their sergeant, for screening for them till it proceeds to IDHO. I just found out the other day that was a pending. I haven't been served with the papers or the report on it yet, but I did pull over the officer that has been writing it up to try to get a clarification on it. So what we're going through, as it's kind of a unit-wide issue in Antelope at the moment. I'm sure you've toured the prison. You've seen how the cells are designed with the glass at the front. We've had a back and forth kind of going on where we're supposed to be trying to meet a middle ground with what parts of the windows we can have covered. Working with staff, and they're also supposed to notify us if they feel we have too much of it covered. That never occurred, but outside of that, I had part of the window covered by where my bed is at.
Just for
Because-
privacy?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't an incident. Like I said, I wasn't even notified of that there was an issue until I went up for actually a level advancement, and the officer told me, "Oh, well, it looks like there's a report in for a pending write-up." But I pulled Officer Contreras over. So we're kind of going back and forth with what is and what's not acceptable. And it's like I've told them too, if you feel you can't see me, then I will obviously move that. If you ask me to move it, I'm going to move it. However, I'm asking them also to take into consideration that we as human beings do deserve some form of privacy. If it's not an incident or it's not interfering with count, then that's what the inmate population, at least in my housing unit, I know is trying to request, that the windows by the bed can be covered partially. Not just because of it is a privacy thing, but it's also out of a respect thing, because I don't want to look across and just see another grown man, all day doing whatever he's doing to cell, and vice versa. I feel like I should be able to have a little piece of that cell to myself where I can sit. There's also the issue with the televisions. The lights are so bright coming in from those windows. The way that the cells are designed, we have to put our television on that shelf, because that's where it's the wiring and things are for to connect it to the wall. So it has to face, the screen has to face towards the window. We can't see it with all that light coming in. It puts flat spots on these televisions, and so guys are spending $300 that they're getting from their families or whatever to have televisions, to where it just seems unreasonable that we can't even use that if we've earned that privilege due to some of that lighting. And the biggest thing, I've actually talked to DIO Christopher Crane about this. He was down in our unit maybe a month and a half ago or so, and I pulled him over personally and spoke to him about numerous things, but one of the window things was the issue. He told me and the other inmates on my rec that if we put in a petition, a proposal for a solution to us being able to cover the window by the bed, that he will write the policy up, and he will find a solution for what UCI can then make us curtains that we can close to cover the window and remove from that window, because he's been working in the department 30, 35 years, a lot longer than I've been here. And he understands that in Draper, we operated with a 6-inch window in the door. That wasn't a security issue unless you covered that up during an incident. So now that we have a 2-foot by 3-foot window in the door that allows you to see every part of our cell, having the one that's directly behind you on your bed and your little personal space covered is not creating any risk to the operations of the department. And it's like I've said before, if there's an issue, if inmates acting up, if we're told to take them down, then that creates a whole different thing, but just going throughout our daily operation, minding our own business and having that little area covered, it is not, through the guys who are professionally employed here, an issue. And for us, it's just something we're asking for to be able to be allowed to have. So that's kind of something we're working through at this time.
So what are you going to do to avoid getting disciplinaries while you're still incarcerated?
I'm going to attempt to do my best at not bringing any unnecessary negative attention and not participating in any negative activities, you know, as, as best as I possibly can. You know, I don't wake up in the morning and say, you know, today is the day. I'm getting a write up today, because no, well, I think there may be some guys who they're entertained by that, but I know me and reasonable other people that we don't seek write ups. You know, we're not seeking to lose our privileges. We're not seeking to not be able to have visits with our family or phone calls with our family or recreation time or paying fines. And
Right.
you know, so it's not it's not something I set out to intentionally accomplish throughout my day.
Just looking at your file, listening to you explain the situations, just a piece of friendly advice. Communicate, right? Respectfully,
Yes, sir.
even though you may feel like you're being wronged at the point of contact, that's not the time to argue. But what what you have done is the aftermath, trying to find a solution and communicating with the officers, which should have been done initially. And it's timing, right? When things are going wrong and that officer's under a lot of stress, that's not the time to argue your position.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Programming. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to get to programming,
Okay.
and I also want to, you know, because you're being considered for parole. So I want to hear a release plan, and we have 10 minutes to get through that. So
Okay.
programming, explain to me your experience in programming, how it's changed you.
If you don't mind, could I read I have a statement that I wrote to stay on track, basically.
Yeah.
But it covers most of that, and then I think if it'll help, then if you have questions about it, if you want me to go into any of the details further, then I can do that.
Very good.
All right. So I would first like to thank my family and friends for their support and for taking the time out of their schedules to be here today. I would also like to apologize to them, and I would like to apologize to the Maestas family for all of us having to be here today because of my past actions and my role in the death of Mr. Jeffrey Maestas 20 years ago. To Jeff's father, Mr. Sam Maestas, I pray that he can feel the sincerity of my apologies today, because I do know that previously he felt that my apologies in court were unsincere or insincere. And so I would also like the Maestas family to know that I've taken it upon myself. Well, I did take it upon myself to write a letter apologizing for their loss. And I was also thanking Mr. Sam Maestas for him assisting my mother when she had car trouble shortly after my trial. Unfortunately, I received that letter back due to them relocating and moving out of the house on 3rd North, and the post office did not have a forwarding address to send it further. But I would like to properly thank him for him helping my mother when he's seen a member of our community in need. I appreciate that dearly. I would also like both families and the board to know that I have no intentions of minimizing or trivializing the death of Mr. Jeffrey Maestas. But I only want to, show everyone here today that I am ready for and deserving of parole. And I also want everybody here today to understand that I'm reading from this paper because it will assist me in communicating that which I wish to convey, and it will help for me not to forget all of the things which I feel I need to say. I do assure you that I've written this from the deepest place of truth, and that's my heart. And I pray that my growth and the path I am on now can be felt in the hearts of everyone here today. I take full accountability for my actions in causing the death of Mr. Jeffrey Maestas. It is, in fact, my accountability and the changes that I've undergone that have brought me to this place of positivity, and which has ignited the fire within me to guide youth of our community in a positive direction and to ultimately break the school to prison pipeline. I may not have a piece of paper from a college is in terms of a degree. However, I do have the actual life experiences that have taught me the many lessons needed to give back to and to educate our youth from a place of love and authenticity. I have been utilizing my time to make progress in all areas of my life, not only for myself, but for others, because I know that our community needs and deserves more positive influences. And I know that I am one of those positive influences. I am ready to dedicate my life to building up our community for generations to come. I'm far from perfect. However, I am motivated to work day in and day out to rise above all the challenges that I may face. I owe it to myself to continue to strive for a better today and a better tomorrow. But I also owe an outstanding debt to my loved ones, especially my mother and grandmother, both of whom have had to shoulder the weight of being widowed at a young age, and yet they exemplified the strength needed to instill values into myself, my brother, our many cousins, and others. I owe them more than I can ever repay, but I am striving to show them that the values of truth, humility, a strong support network, love for self and others, dignity, and positivity have been accepted and have been absorbed into my soul, and I will continue to live my life in accord with these values. I also owe an outstanding debt to society, and although I've paid part of that debt through my incarceration, I can only work at paying the rest of this debt by being in society and living the positive, productive, and progressive life that I've chosen for myself. I want the board to know that I not only intend on working with the youth, but I also have resources and job opportunities lined up in the juvenile justice system and at community organizations that will help me to put my goals and my vision for my life into action beyond myself. There are a couple of support letters in my blue packet from gentlemen who have worked within the juvenile justice system and community centers for over 25 years. And I know you'll have the time to see those later. I want the board to know that I am also an artist and I will continue to grow as such by enrolling in school to gain knowledge on digital designs, to help me with my clothing designs, artwork, and to lay a foundation for my multimedia organization that I ultimately want to have on the side of my career with working with youth. I plan on contacting vocational rehab to assist me with getting into school, as well as to assist me in finding a mental health therapist that I can build a working relationship with. Um, and I want the board to know that outside of the time that I will be spending on building up my professional and my educational standing in life, I will fill the free time that I have with my family, especially my grandmother who's getting up in age and she needs assistance with things like getting around because she doesn't drive. And that's something that I am excited for the future to be able to do. And I will gladly take her around and help out with anything else that she needs, whether it be fixing things around her home or also around my mother's house.
Hey, Mr. Boss, I hate to interrupt you, but we got 3 minutes.
Okay,
Can you summarize and then?
Yes, I will.
I want that release plan.
In regards to my living arrangements, I plan on living in Salt Lake with my family to help with the cost of living. I have numerous places I can go, but I intend probably to stay with my mom. That'd be my first choice, as long as that would be approved by AP&P. I'm aware that my probation officer will probably want me to do some classes, and I'm definitely planning on abiding by that and all other parole standards. I'll be staying in contact with Mr. Josh Penrod and his associates at the Level Up organization to further my training that I have begun through the Captain Your Story program, which I'm currently enrolled in. And I have found great satisfaction with being afforded the opportunity to gain the wisdom that they have to offer. And because the Captain Your Story program is providing us with real tools that we can utilize in our life for our own success stories, I would like to bring attention to the different types of programming and educational courses I participated in while incarcerated. On pages 11 and 12 in my blue packet, you will find that I have completed 6 life skills courses successfully. I have completed 3 ACCI life skills programs on the tablet that we are now being afforded. I completed 2 of the Hustle 2.0 programs. I did numerous self-study programs through the Prison Educational Network organization that has offered courses through the mail. I've completed 16 educational courses along with earning my high school diploma. And I am currently enrolled in the Captain Your Story program. And I truly know that I am ready now for parole. And I'm humbly requesting that the board give me the chance to be the success story and positive example for others by opening up the gates and sending me on to the next phase of my journey. I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank everybody that came today. And I would just ask that you highly consider letting me back to society, because I will be that success story.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. There is one thing I want to clarify. You're still good standing with Black Mafia gangsters?
I'm still on paper a member, but no, I don't participate in.
Or you're not under a
I don't
modified?
promote gang activity. No, I live around other active gang members from a lot of different gangs, but no, I didn't modify because honestly, that is something that, depending on what group you used to be associated with or are associated with, can actually lead to putting your life in further danger. So I didn't with that, but I do ask that the board take into consideration, I haven't been written up for any type of promoting gang activity for quite a long time. No STG involvement at all. And in fact, recently within my time in Max living around other active gang members, it's been mostly Crips that I've lived around. And I know that this reason I'm here today is you know, there's gang issues that were a major part of that. But I don't promote violence, period. Especially just the nonsensical violence of gangs. I haven't been promoting that for a long time, and I've lived around a lot of different Crips with absolutely no issues.
But understanding there's going to be barriers out there
Yes.
should you be granted parole. And one of those could be your association to
Oh, yeah,
that
absolutely.
gang.
Absolutely. I plan
That could
on
be
not
on your face.
associating with anybody that is participating in any kind of criminal activity, whether it be gang activity or any other kind of criminal activity, period. I really want to continue to build pro-social relationships and operate within a pro-social network.
Well, Mr. Voss, just to let you know what moving forward looks like, I'm one of 5 members of the board. I will capture what you said, the essence of this hearing, and put it on paper, and then create a vote. And then that vote goes from to me to other members of the board, and that's how the decision's ultimately made. You'll be made aware of that in writing, but also for your family, be on our website. Give me, 2 to 3 weeks to get this done. But that's where we are. Do you have any questions about the process moving forward?
No, there is a slight mention of an incident that occurred where I was actually given like a positive C note for.
Mhm.
They said that it's not detailed in here, but if you would allow me just a couple seconds to
Yeah, go ahead.
elaborate. So basically, what happened was there was a serious issue about to occur between the guys on my rec and between staff. And along with my brother, we intervened in helping to de-escalate that and to prevent, what was probably going to turn out to be an extremely bad situation. The cops were outnumbered. There were 16 guys in our section. There were 2 officers in there. There were a few guys that were quite angry and on the verge of assaulting staff. And I physically put myself in between that and talked to the guys on my rec that I felt were most aggravated, to try to get them to, take a step back and realize that we've all come a long way and that this kind of a setback is not worth it. I even physically hugged one of the guys and walked with him away from where the crowd was at, and the incident was initiated at, towards the section door. By this time, other staff had arrived, but still, it was an extremely hostile situation. So I know that other staff and other inmates have felt that that was something that I needed to clarify with the board, and that speaks volumes to the fact that I don't promote violence. In fact, I will do what I can to stop that and to show that even because these other guys are Crips, with these guys who are deemed in the misunderstandings of gang culture being the blood's mortal enemies and this kind of thing, that we may have had the wrong ideas when we were younger, but now we're beyond that, and we don't want any negative impact or consequences towards anybody else, or we want to stop all of that prior to that occurring. So,
Well, I appreciate you saving an officer getting hurt. But that's the bigger picture and the communication that at least I'm looking for from somebody that's in these types of situations. So good on you. But also for the record, a Dwayne Bardot sent a letter on your behalf, articulating the improvements and the strides you've gained since this incident. So, all right, that concludes our hearing. Thank you, Mr. Boss.
all right, thank you.
Okay, so let's unpack this, and I'll just start by telling you that he was denied, and I'll read the notes that Sir Richard pulled directly from his denial. Now, he's allowed to have a rehearing in 2 years, March 2026. This hearing took place October 1st, 2024, so it's not that long of a time for someone who's facing 100 years and picks up 2 felonies while in prison, right? Now, here's what they noted. If you recall at the beginning, he was talking about, hey, my guideline date already passed. I should be getting out, because that's what Utah does. They give like these 2, 3, 4, 500-year sentences, but then they have a guideline date that they like to parole people by. But the board puts in their notes 100, even the board noted your challenge about the guideline date. After researching this issue, a clerical error was discovered. Was it a clerical error? It was discovered. This clerical error has been corrected, and the guideline date has been changed to March 22nd, 2026. The board considered your poor institutional behavior and or major violations in prison as an aggravating factor. You are expected to enroll and to participate in the cognitive behavior therapy. So he needs to have uh, to take a program, and they don't even say don't have any write-ups, but if he can go the next 2 years somehow not having a write-up, which is incredibly difficult when you're in the situation he's in, then yeah, maybe they will parole him. But does anyone else not just see the insane irony in the fact that he is handcuffed to a chair, and maybe his legs are shackled too, and they're considering him for parole? I can never get over that fact. If you can't trust the man to be without shackles at a parole interview, then how in the world can you trust him out in the public? Now, remember, again, his brother was paroled on compassionate release because his a previous girlfriend had killed their 4-year-old child. They paroled him. He gets out. He gets a DUI. It's caught on body cam. They still don't revoke him. The parole officer can't get in touch with him for months. Still don't revoke him. He beats up his girlfriend, sends her to the hospital. She's a broken leg. They still don't revoke him, and then he kills her. And we're going to touch on that in a second. But Utah has a huge problem with their parole. But let's just go over first his appeal, right? So, statement of facts. October 26, 2004, he was charged with murder in the first degree. 5 days after his arrest, his attorney, on his attorney's advice, and in the presence of his attorney, he waived his Miranda rights and confessed to killing, but claimed that he had done it in self-defense. Now, it never worked because this guy he killed didn't have a gun on him. Defendant retained new counsel who moved to suppress the defendant's confession, alleging that it had been taken in violation of his Miranda rights unknowingly. So this is part of his appeal. And they're saying it was grossly ineffective legal advice. And it probably was, because I don't think they had any real data pointing that it was him. He probably could have gotten a pretty good deal. This person he killed was, my understanding, involved in a lot of in gangs as well, and so it would have been, it probably was a very bad advice to just confess to it right there on the spot. It was not in his best interest, that's for sure. So a jury convicted the defendant as charged. The trial court imposed 5 years to life. Isn't that? And see, again, 5 years to life. That's Utah. Not 20 to life, not 25 to life, not 30 to life, 5 to life. And he only got one. The only reason it was 6 to life is because he got an enhancement for having a gun. So it was +1. So 6 years to life. Crazy, right? Utah's strange. Their legislation is strange. So here's what happened, the shooting. Drivers were startled on October 21st, 2004 to see a shooting near the intersection of blah, blah, blah. It was about 4:30 p.m. and still light out. Melissa was waiting to turn left on Starcrest Drive when she saw a green car pull up to the curb and the driver got out. The driver walked to the back of his car towards a pedestrian walking down the street. As Adams started to turn, she saw the pedestrian pull out a gun and shoot at the driver, who by that time had reached the midpoint of his trunk. The two men were about 5 to 6 feet apart, but it looked like the driver was starting to retreat back around his car. That the pedestrian was pursuing him. As Adams completed her turn, she heard 4 or 5 shots. So that's what the eyewitness saw. 2 people, right? But that would not have been enough to. About a block north of the shooting, Adams saw the shooter through his rear mirror. This is another witness. Get into a Ford Explorer. Adams returned to the scene of the shooting to check on the driver of the green car. That's brave. On her way back, she passed the Explorer. She looked for a plate number, but the Explorer had no plates. When Adams arrived back at the scene, she found the driver lying unresponsive. Oh, no, this is the same witness. Okay. She called 911. Jens Wood also saw the shooting. She was turning on 700 North, and she said it sounded like a cap gun. It was a 22 caliber. She looked around to see the people in the driveway running between the cars and onto the lawn, and the one in the lead turned out and was 4 to 6 feet away from the one chasing him. The man being pursued was larger and had his hands up. The pursuer was pointing a gun at the larger man. Miss Wood drove on because she couldn't believe she had just seen the shooting. She later called the police when she learned that someone was killed. There were several other witnesses, 7 or 8, but only 3 testified. It's also part of the altercation. He stepped to the light, car's back. He saw 2 men, one closing the other, slowed and watched his rearview mirror. Hudson could see the butt of the gun, but not the barrel. Okay. And he said he was larger, had his hands raised above his head. So there are multiple witnesses that say he did have his hands in the air. The scene was secured by the time homicide detectives arrived between 5:10 and 5:15. The victim later identified as Jeffrey lay under a sheet in the driveway. He had died from 4 .22 caliber bullet wounds, 2 to the front of his body and 2 to the back. Each bullet wounds were potentially fatal. I don't know. Seems like he had his hands up to me. Police found no weapons if you have 2 witnesses that say it, and you shoot him twice in the back. It's just like, police found no weapons on his person. They did find a wooden baseball bat in the front right passenger floor of the green Taurus. You can't play this off as a defense thing. You freaking killed him, okay? The Taurus was still running with the keys to the ignition. You murdered him, dude. But I mean, he never said he didn't murder him. He just said, look, I didn't kill him when he's like had his hands up. It wasn't like an execution. So that was whatever. I guess you take it for what it is. Although no single witness to the shooting could identify the defendant, the gunman, the defendant was suspected within an hour of the detectives' arrival at the scene. The defendant's former Little League football coach informed the police at the scene that he had seen the defendant a few minutes after 4:30 walking south on Starcrest Drive. The defendant was then only about a block away from the shooting scene. Meanwhile, police began looking for the real Ford Explorer that the shooter had entered immediately after killing. The gang squad found it in the following morning about 1:30 a.m. at the owner's address. Police found the owner and his girlfriend staying at a motel. Ferguson told police that the defendant was the person who had jumped into his Ford Explorer. Wow, he ratted on him real quick. The day before, statement police broadcast attempted blah, blah, blah. The defendant retains counsel, turns himself in and gives a statement. So the defendant retained counsel, turned himself in and gave a statement. And again, I just don't see why. Well, he's saying it's self-defense, but do you do that? I guess so. I guess you could say it's self-defense, and then you just go to jury trial like that. Otherwise, what would have happened if he turned himself in and said I had nothing to do with it? They would have probably found, yeah, all right, what does he to do, right? There's just no self-defense. You just can't kill a man who's not armed. It just won't work. Okay. Later that day, the defendant's attorney, John Busher, arranged the defendant to turn himself in. Police arrested the defendant and booked him into the jail, but did not interview him. 5 days later, okay, this is what we spoke about. He admitted to the shooting. The defendant's house, threatened to kick the defendant's door. Now, he claims that he had done a lot of things. The guy had shot his house up, had threatened him, his mother, and all that stuff, but that's still that's not going to work. It's not the way the law works. Jumped in this car, and again, and can you imagine in broad daylight? That's how brazen you are in broad daylight in front of rush hour traffic. It's just insane. The defendant pulled the trigger until he emptied his gun. The defendant admitted to the detective that he had fled the scene, and the explorer admitted knowing but claimed it was coincidence. Now, again, we'll go over what his brother had done just because it's interesting. Sir Richard pointed it out, and it is interesting that Utah has a huge parole problem where they release people, and how they release his brother, who then went on to kill his girlfriend. But it is an interesting parole hearing. For one, I'm always amazed by how I thought, well, articulate, spoken. If you take away the tattoos, you put him in a nice. You just wouldn't know that he has just spent the last 20 years of his life in a max dangerous security prison where every day you're kind of fighting for survival, and that it just seems like for me, I would never be able to guess. And you see this all the time in Utah. It's the strangest things, right? It's so often those that are inked totally up are quite well articulate. We'll keep track of this hearing for you in 2 years and see how he does. Let's go jump into the case about his brother.
On January 30th, 2021, Salt Lake police responded to a restaurant where a bloodied Shandon Scott told them Voss beat her up after accusing her of flirting with another man. She also divulged he'd assaulted her back in November, breaking her leg, requiring surgery that night. Scott's friend, Heather Redford.
Months ago, when prior events of domestic violence had occurred, we told her to stop.
A confidential document shows Voss's parole agent was contacted by Salt Lake PD that day and made aware Scott had been assaulted. At that point, the agent finally took action and wrote a warrant for Voss's arrest to the Board of Pardons and Parole. But for almost 2 months, Voss was nowhere to be found until May 1st of this year.
There was a car accident, shots fired, somebody was shot at.
Shandon Scott's body was found in a car on I-80.
This female has been shot multiple times.
Shame on the board for letting him, but shame on AT&T for allowing him to stay out. That's their job.
I requested an interview with Dan Blanchard, the director of APMP, to ask him why the agent took no action when violations occurred and why his supervisor allowed it. But the answer was no. And Mike Haddon, the director of the Board of Pardons and Parole, also refused to talk. So I went to Tom Ross, the executive director of the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice.
I'm here sitting with you because I'm not running from this. I know why I was brought in.
Do we have a supervision problem in this state?
I think we have a supervision challenge.
I asked Ross specifically about the Voss case and his many chances at rehabilitation and parole.
There can be unintended consequences.
Ross was informed about Voss's criminal history in advance of the interview, but said he could not speak about APMP or the Board of Pardons and Parole. Instead, he said,
and I'm going to do everything I can in my role as from the policy perspective to try to look at it and see what do we learn from this? What can we improve going forward and were the right things at play.
5 days after Shandon Scott was murdered, Voss's parole agent amended his warrant request, writing that initially Voss was doing well with his parole. However, in light of the circumstances, it appears as if that is not the case. The Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office is still screening the case for criminal charges. We have much more on Voss, his criminal history, and supervision on our website, KU.
And I'm becoming familiar with Wendy. This is something she seems to focus on as an investigative reporter. And we are seeing that Utah has a serious supervision problem. Sir Richard just showed a case. I'm going to bring it to you soon, where there is a man who is locked up for what he's done to little ones. And yet, while he was out on parole, he claims, and frankly, it's that his parole officer allowed him to date a woman with 2 little ones. And his plan, he says it on his parole meeting, that when he gets out, he is going to move in with her. And keep in mind, that is what he is locked up for. So I do believe absolutely Utah has a huge supervision problem. We see them constantly releasing people who then get revoked, come back 6 months later, get released again, and get revoked. And it is a broken revolving door of the system. So, hey, I'm glad that we're just contributing to bringing out that insanity of the case. Remember, he only got out because they said it was compassionate release. But God, I don't know. Anyways, I wonder if him being his brother will hurt his chances of getting out on parole as well. But anyways, with that, I'll let you go.
But I didn't want that. I still didn't want that to be at that level, but he kind of just pushed, he pushed the issue. He got out of the car and he came running back around the back of the car towards me. And at that point, I tried to yell at him, stop. I pulled out my gun. I didn't flash the gun prior to or anything like that. Pulled out my gun and I shot him. And he turned around and he ran back around his car. As I was shooting, he started to turn. I kind of started to turn to head more in the southeast direction. After he got around his car, I was out in the middle of the street and I realized that I didn't know where I was going. I had nothing in that direction. So I turned around and ran back westward toward my mother's house. And I passed Mr. Maestas as he was up in the driveway of the houses there on the corner. And that is when he did at that time have his hands up, but I continued running past him. There's no shots fired or anything like that. The shooting all occurred initially